This is the 3rd century Roman Empire. Despite being one of the largest empires in history, the Roman Empire was facing its worst crisis due to decades of civil wars and constant political and economic instability when Diocletian took over as its emperor in 284 AD. To bring peace and order back to the empire, Diocletian launched a series of highly ambitious economic reforms aimed at fighting an extreme rate of inflation caused by the chaos that the Roman Empire was in. As ambitious as those economic reforms were, they proved to be delusional and had no economic prudence. While it can be said that Diocletian's fight against inflation was delusional because of the lack of economists in his empire, many of today's economies, with all their economists, continue to go down the path of Diocletian in their fight against inflation. So, what were Diocletian's inflation-fighting policies, which not only failed to reduce inflation, but also contributed to the ultimate fall of the mighty Roman Empire? Once we have looked at the economic reforms that Diocletian introduced on his path of fighting inflation, we can draw lessons about how modern economies can avoid the same path in their fight against inflation in today's world. Chapter 1. Debasing of coinage. It started with debasing of coinage, to stabilize the government budget and fund military campaigns after suffering decades of civil wars and economic crisis. Diocletian debased the coins that were in circulation and introduced a number of new coins. Managing an empire costs a lot of money, especially when large portions of the population you control have no interest in being part of your empire. Stamping down rebellions, foreign military threats, and conquering new lands all costs money, and a lot of it. Like his predecessors, debasing of coinage was the only way for Diocletian to fulfill his need for money. Diocletian debased the coinage by reducing the amount of gold in coins to pay for his military campaigns. This debasing of coinage heavily increased money supply, which eventually spiraled out of control and led to a steep rise in prices. With new coins being debased, older coins with more gold in them commanded higher market value. Sellers of products would charge different rates based on whether you paid in new or old coins, and people started hoarding old coins. In addition to the price inflation, this caused inefficiencies as both merchants and consumers had to spend copious amounts of time keeping track of the value of their various coins. Diocletian was aware of the devastating effects of debasing of coinage, which led to hyperinflation in his empire. In his efforts to solve the inflation crisis, Diocletian introduced a new high-quality gold, silver, and bronze coinage. These newly introduced, higher denomination coinage were aimed at improving the purchasing power of the currency. But this did nothing to solve the fundamental problem that the government was spending more than its tax revenue. So shortly after introducing the new high-quality coins, Diocletian went back to his old ways of debasing the currency, again causing the inflation rate to soar up to 100% at the peak. Chapter 2. Taxation Reform. Taxation reform was another attempt by Diocletian to fight inflation and fix the Roman economy. Diocletian did not increase taxes, rather he improved the efficiency of tax collection by standardizing tax collection throughout his empire. Under the new taxation system, a bureaucratic order was established which included designated people to decide the value of land and population for taxation, as well as for the collection of those taxes. As the empire and its citizens did not have any direct income, there was no income tax. Rather, the new taxation system was based on a combined productive unit of land and population. While this new taxation system enabled Diocletian to set a foundation for this national budget for the first time in the empire, this system had no account of basic economic principles. For example, the new taxation system did not take account of agriculture productivity of land, which not only varied from season to season, but also from region to region. As a result of this new taxation system, people from all regions were petitioning for tax remittance for reasons such as lack of productivity due to unfavorable weather conditions. You can guess the response of the government to those petitions. People had to pay their taxes irrespective of the productivity of their resources. On the other hand, Diocletian's government refused to accept taxes in their own issued coinage due to their steeply declining value. Diocletian was never sure of the remaining actual value of his coinage, so he started collecting taxes in kind, either in land, or gold, or silver bullion. Like the result of his earlier efforts to fight inflation, The new taxation system also resulted in failure in its fight against hyperinflation and economic chaos that the empire was in. This taxation system became so oppressive to common people of the empire that they not only evaded taxes but also fled their land in favor of lower tax jurisdictions. Chapter 3: Edict on Maximum Prices. Diocletian's final nail in the coffin of Roman economy was his edict on maximum prices that he introduced in 301 AD. As his final attempt to fight inflation, Diocletian set maximum prices to more than 1,200 goods and services, 130 different grades of labor, as well as various transport fees. The preamble to this edict mentioned boundlessness of human greed, especially that of merchants, as the primary reason behind rise in prices, which makes it clear that Diocletian did not understand the basics of economics behind the inflation phenomenon in his empire. Diocletian and his co-regents did not take any economic principles into account in setting the price limits in this edict. No account of regional variations, no account of seasonal fluctuations, no account of differences in wholesale and retail prices, no account of transportation costs. The ignorance of these economic principles in setting price limits indicate that the edict was mainly intended to immunize the government from the hyperinflation caused by debasing of coinage and taxation so that it could continue to fund the military. Nevertheless, it was the common people who suffered the most from these price limits. The penalties for breaking these maximum prices were so extreme that people were put to death for buying and selling goods beyond their set price limits. Unfortunately, this edict on prices only increased the problem of inflation. People all over the empire started hoarding precious materials and created black markets, which increased the prices of goods and services even more. In response to the effect of price limits, Diocletian passed another law, announcing the death penalty for failing business. To combat declining value of coins and currency speculation, anyone caught involved in currency speculation was also put to death. The lack of account for supply and demand of goods, as well as the market system, created artificial scarcity, black markets, and decreased production, all of which only increased the already massive levels of inflation in the empire and turned his edict into a dead letter. If we now look at Diocletian's policies, it can be understood that there is no consistency. Increasing the supply of money for funding the military, debasing the currency, and setting price limits do not align with one another for a government attempting to fight inflation. However, what else can be expected from Diocletian? A military commander who had no understanding of economic theory. Diocletian was a brilliant military commander with many impressive military victories on his resume, but his complete lack of understanding in the field of economics destroyed the Roman economy and set the seeds for its eventual collapse. Diocletian's desperate attempt of fighting inflation with price limits was doomed to fail. This extreme policy-making lacked basic understanding of economics, which only made the situation worse, setting the empire on a path of hyperinflation. The amount of suffering these delusional reforms of Diocletian caused gives us a reminder that modern economies need to be wary of consequences of decisions such as price limits in their fight against inflation. Conclusion. The failure of Diocletian's ambitious yet delusional attempts to fight inflation has several lessons for today's economies in how not to fight inflation. The failure of Diocletian's coinage debasement provides an important lesson for today's central banks in their pace and timing of monetary expansion, as an ill-planned monetary expansion could soon spiral out of control to create hyperinflation. Diocletian's edict of maximum prices is an example of how fundamentally flawed price controls are as a way of fighting inflation. Especially in today's interconnected economies, such a measure could create severe consequences such as production decline, reduced trade, and black markets, further increasing inflation. Overall, Diocletian's delusional fight against inflation only suggests that inflation is a complex economic phenomenon with several underlying factors. This cannot be ignored by governments in their measures to combat inflation and maintain price stability of goods in their economies.